All right, everybody. So this week we are going to start on 2.4 while loops. Now, while loops are not going to be a whole lot different than your conditionals that you've learned before. And those of you who were with me last year, you're going to have a little bit of an idea or understanding of what a while loop does um, right off the gate. So, we're going to look at how we can get code to repeat itself by using something called the while loop. And as you can see on the screen, we have while loop, while clause, and loop block that we're going to talk about today. So first, let's talk about while loop. While loop repeats a section of code that lets us avoid writing the same code multiple times, because we know we all, love that. It also, we can keep doing something even if we're not sure how many times we should repeat it. An example would be if a user is entering a password, it will repeat asking them for the password until they get it right. Or one repetition of a loop is called an iteration, or I should have said, keep this in mind. This is a vocab word that you're going to need to know. One repetition of a loop is called an iteration. Iteration. It's called iteration. Iteration. So this is what a while loop would look like. You first check for the condition. Is it true? If so, you're going to perform the block of code and then check the condition again. You will continue to do this until the condition evaluates to false. And so for the first time, our code can go backwards. After finishing the loop block, it jumps back up to the condition. So again, taking a look here, we have while it is true, the loop block will continue to run. And it just keeps checking that it's true over and over until eventually it evaluates to false. And once it evaluates to false, it will then jump to the code that is below the conditional or the while loop that you're working with. We have the while clause. So the while clause starts a while loop. It's the format of a loop, and it's very similar to the conditionals that we've already done. And just like an if statement, it starts with a clause. And it looks like this. So while condition colon. The clause is just like an if clause, except it uses the word while instead of the word if. It also ends with a colon, just like the if statements. Like conditionals, the condition is a Boolean expression that is true or false, and loop continues while the condition is true. Okay? Another one I want to talk to you about is the loop block. So the loop block gets code that gets repeated. So just like the then block, the code belongs to the clause above it. Unlike the then block that we did last week, upon reaching the end of the block, the program will return to the clause above it. So if you remember before when we did our if then, the computer would run if it was true, then it would jump to then, run it once, and then be done. In this case, it won't be done after one run through. So it'll check the while. As long as the while remains true, it will continue to jump back to the loop block and run it over and over again until that while evaluates to false. It looks kind of like this. So while condition, colon, and again it's checking to see if that condition is true. It will run the loop block of code that is indented below it. So keep in mind, the while block is indented below the clause. It contains one or more lines of code. It repeats while the condition is true, and it usually contains a line that modifies something in the condition that will ultimately make the loop stop. Okay, so keep that in mind for right now. We're just going to do our slides first, and then I'll jump into the code for this assignment. And so then our while loop looks a little like this. While count less than max. You will print count and then count up by 1. So ultimately, this will repeat over and over until you get to the point where that first while can no longer be true. Once your count reaches more than max, it will stop the loop block and it will jump to the code that is below the condition. So in summary, while loops have the same three parts as conditionals. It has a clause, it has a condition, and it has a block. Every time the condition is true, the loop is going to repeat, and something inside the block needs to eventually make the condition false. Otherwise, it's going to be an infinite loop and run forever, forever, ever, ever. All right, I'm going to pause momentarily, and then we're going to jump over to the code. It'll be a longer pause for me than it will be for you. Yay for computer stuff. Hey, I'm back. For you, it took half a second. For me, it took 2 seconds. Okay, so in this situation, what we see is our code. Line 6 starts out with name, name gets input, enter a name. And line 7 is set up like we used to do it. If name equal Judy, then we're going to print name input. You can't choose that, enter a different name. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to change our if. We're going to change our if to the word while. Okay, so while name Judy, name equals input. You can't choose that, enter a different name. So we're going to run it to see how it behaves. So enter a name, and I'm going to say Judy. You can't choose that, enter a different name. What if I do Judy again? Oh, look. Now what if I enter something else? Program ended. Very good. Very, very good. Okay, so now that that section is done, we're not quite done. Now we're going to talk about looping. Okay, so the block needs a line that affects the condition. We're going to remove name in front of the second input line. So I'm going to get rid of this name here. And instead, we're going to just have input. So I'm going to get rid of that equal sign as well. So it should say input. You can't choose that, enter a different name. If the condition can never be false, that's called an infinite loop. And infinite loops are dangerous and can crash your browser. So be very careful with that. So from here, we're now going to run it and see what happens. So we're going to run it, enter your name. So we're going to start with Judy. Can't choose that, choose a different name. What if I say Judy again? And what if I say GPie this time? And we still have, you can't choose that, enter a different name. So by removing name and equal, you see we've got ourselves stuck in an infinite loop. And so that's why we removed it, to see what an infinite loop looks like. Okay, so close that out. So now we're going to return name and equal to the front of this line of code here. I'm going to go name equals input. And why did you do that? You know, you're probably thinking, GPie, why did you make me do that? Because I wanted to show you what an infinite loop looks like. So you saw without having the variable name equals input there, we were stuck and we would never get out of the infinite loop no matter what we typed. And that's not what we want to happen, right? So with that, this first introduction to while loops is done. That means you can go down to that lovely pink button and hit the turn in. And I will see you on the next one, my darlings.